So what I do a lot is I work with kids with severe behavior problems. And when you work with a lot of kids with behavior problems, there's one issue that tends to crop up, and that issue tends to be where kids are struggling academically. And a lot of the teachers, if you have them give you two lists, a list of kids who are struggling behaviorally and a list of kids who are struggling academically, they tend to look very much the same. So this is going to go about it a little bit differently when we're going to be looking at instruction from a behavior perspective. What types of things would we want to look at in a program that could help solve or at least prevent behavior problems from occurring in the first place? And I'll talk about generally two types of kids that I see when I go out and I consult with students. And I consult with students who are either at a Tier 1 level, for example, or Tier 2 or a Tier 3 level. And the Tier 3 level doing functional behavioral assessments, writing behavior support plans. But basically, I'm going to be looking at two types of students, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, on this PowerPoint, too, another disclaimer, a lot of the examples will be from Flex Literacy, primarily because I'm intimately involved in that, and I know that program pretty well, but also because we were pretty careful in including in that program different techniques, behavior management techniques, that will help prevent at least a lot of our behavior issues in terms of instruction. And we'll talk more about that, and I'll talk about the different categories that we generally see in programs with regard to behavior management. It's just a cartoon. Can you help me, Mrs. Martin? This wasn't covered in any of my education courses. That tends to be the case in terms of behavior management. We tend, and I teach in a general education department, one of the things we tend to do is we tend to teach instruction separately from behavior management. We tend to teach it as if they're two separate things, and they are not. And this is one issue that we're finding out over and over again is that behavior management and instructional issues go hand in hand. You cannot separate them out. So whenever I teach behavior management classes, I always include instruction. You have to. Because instruction, poor instruction, can increase our behavior problems in classrooms. So we have to be aware of that. In terms of behavior management concerns, the literature is very ripe in terms of showing where our problems are in terms of behavior issues. This is one quote: "Student misbehavior has been and still is the main concern of educators across the country." That's been true from the time I started teaching. That's been true for 25 years, and it hasn't changed. In fact, there may be no greater hurdle in public schools today than that presented by students who exhibit challenging behavior. When students misbehave, obviously they learn less, and it's this negative, vicious cycle downward. The less students learn, the more aversive school becomes, the more behavior problems that result. Disruptive behavior in any classroom impedes learning, and the time spent in redirecting students back to task takes away from valuable instructional time, which in turn affects student academic performance. And again, this is something that we've known for a long time. Unfortunately, it took us a long time before we started looking at an integration of the two systems, behavior management and instruction. That's beginning to happen now more and more. It's another little strip here. I'm going to close my eyes and cover my ears. I expect the student who took my chair, my desk, and my chalkboard to bring them back. And what this shows you is, obviously, as our misbehaviors occur in our classrooms, that wastes a lot of time. That wastes instructional time. So the better behavior we get in our classrooms, the more instructional time we have, that should also result in improved student performance. Concerns continued. Students who misbehave interfere with the learning of their peers and consume teachers' time, disrupting the classroom and school. Difficulty managing student behavior is a factor associated with teacher burnout, stress, and dissatisfaction. In fact, and this is a stunning statistic, 50% of urban teachers leave the profession within the first 5 years of their career, citing behavior problems and management as factors influencing their decision to leave. And it's even worse for special education teachers. That's about 2 years. So the life expectancy of teachers in the classroom, if we have behavior problems occurring in the classroom, they tend to make our lifespans much shorter in that classroom. This is an example of that. You must be Timmy's dad. I'm Timmy's teacher. And I think we've all worked with kids like this. So it's critical to add academic programming whenever we address behavior management and vice versa. We can't address one without the other. And I'll show you in a little bit of meta-analysis we had published a few years ago that looks at what happens to schools when they do only academic restructuring, what happens to schools when they do only behavior restructuring, and what happens to schools when they combine the two together. So the basic message is that academic and behavioral supports must be intertwined. Combining behavior support and effective instruction may be an important theme for school reform in the United States. This is from Horner and Sugai. Integrated three-tier reading and behavior models target those students who lack the necessary academic and behavioral resources for a successful education. So I want you to think about, if you implement an RTI system in your school, there's no reason not to combine that with a school-wide positive behavior interventions and support system as well. They go hand in hand. And again, we don't get the same level of improvement in student academic performance if we don't add a behavior component to what we're doing instructionally. And that's fairly clear in the research literature. This is a study I talked about. We published with Greg Benner, who's at University of Washington, and a couple other people we know. It's 2007. This was a meta-analysis looking at three types of schools. Schools that do only academic restructuring. In particular, this study was with reading, so an RTI system in reading. Schools that do behavior only, in particular school-wide positive behavior interventions and support program, and schools that integrate the two together. And when you look at the effect size, I want you to point that out. A 0.1 to 0.29 is generally considered small if you're looking at rule of thumb. 0.3 to 0.9 is considered moderate. 0.5 and above is large. If we look at reading only, schools that do reading only restructuring get about a 0.3 effect size. Borderline small to moderate. Schools that do behavior only, by the way, the behavior blank, in the research literature at that point in time that we looked at, schools didn't track behavior, which I find this kind of interesting. Schools that did behavior only, they got an impact, now they weren't addressing reading, they got an impact on reading of a 0.18, which is small, in terms of behavior of 0.28. When schools integrated the two systems together, look what happens. Your reading goes up to a 0.53, that's the large effect size. And the behavior goes up to a 0.31. The point of that is then that when I include behavior as part of my academic programming, I get better academic programming or results, which makes sense. But we don't do that very often, unfortunately. So academic behavior message, effective instructional practices, good behavior management leads to student academic success. Now, I always put this up because this is something that I like to talk to my pre-service teachers, my students I'm training to be teachers, and everyone talks about Bloom in terms of the Bloom's taxonomy, but usually we don't talk about Bloom in terms of what he considered alterable and non-alterable variables. I think there's some important information here. And if I go in and I'm consulting with students or on a student who has a severe behavior problem, I will get frequently explanations for the student's misbehavior right here. It's due to ethnicity. It's due to socioeconomic status. The kid's poor. Or the kid comes from a dysfunctional home. Or it's gender-based. He's just a boy. We don't often get the explanations when I go in and consult with kids that I'm not good at using my instructional time. I have too much downtime or too much transition time when I'm instructing my kids. I don't have the teaching skills that I need in order to handle the student, or the quantity of teacher-to-student interactions. Those are three key areas in terms of behavior management and academic preparation that we need to address, especially this one. I'm going to expand upon this one a little bit. And Mark Shin talked about the Meaningful Differences study. One part of that, he talked about the quantity of words that parents speak to their kids from three classes: lower socioeconomic class, middle, and high socioeconomic class families. However, there's also some other data in there that are really, really important when we talk about the type of interactions the parents have with their kids. And that's extremely important when we look at what happens in a typical classroom, and I'll talk about that. This is instructional momentum. This comes from Hofmeister and Lupke. It's a little dated, but I think it's a great graphic. And curriculum pacing, lesson pacing, and transition management contributes to instructional momentum. Instructional momentum then results in reduced behavior problems and increases in student interest and achievement. And I'm going to show you some examples of how we've tried to build these into the different programs. Now, in terms of effective instruction, learning science has shown what effective instruction is. Effective instruction comes from having appropriate curriculum pacing, lesson pacing, transition management, like I said. Students who are participating in well-structured activities that engage their interests and who are highly motivated to learn and who are working on tasks that are challenging within their capabilities, and I want you to remember that because this is important. Within their capabilities, rarely pose any serious management problems. Remember I said there's two generally types of students that I will see in a classroom. This is one type, where the instruction is too high for the students. They're making too many errors, they're struggling, they're getting frustrated, and I start getting behavior management as a side effect, behavior problems as a side effect. Therefore, the goal for educators is to help students become successful in the classroom, both academically and behaviorally. Now, in terms of the big ideas of effective instruction, we're going to expand on these as I go through this talk. Differentiated instruction, meeting the needs of every single student. Effective behavior management. And I'll talk about, there's going to be 4 categories that I'm going to really zoom in on in terms of effective behavior management as we go through this. Clear instructions and appropriate feedback. How to provide a feedback appropriately. And this goes back to that quality of teacher-student interaction. How we provide feedback is key in motivating students to continue on. This was a study, a meta-analysis in 2003 by Marzano. They did a meta-analysis of more than 100 studies and found 31% fewer discipline problems and real violations for teachers who had positive relationships with their students over the course of a year than teachers who did not have such positive relationships. And earlier, I don't remember who stated that, but it was stated that we have to have good relationships with our students. And there's a way to have good relationships with our students. How do we do it? 1, explicitly teach and encourage classroom-wide expectations. Explicitly teach it. If you're doing a school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports program, one of the first things that you would do is go in and do an assessment of the school. And you could use an assessment called the SET, the School-Wide Evaluation Tool. And on that School-Wide Evaluation Tool, there's a number of different assessments that you do. But with the SET, one of the things that I would do is I'd ask teachers, generally pull out around 10 to 12 teachers at random, and I would ask the teachers a few questions. And one question I would ask a teacher is, what are your expectations? And there's no cheating. You can't look at the board. And I've had teachers try to do that. Can't look at the board. And the worst school district I ever had, no one knew the expectations of the school, not even an administrator. I could not find anyone in the district who could tell me all 79 of them. This particular school district, in the high school, they had a 2-week waiting list for the solutions room because kids continuously violated an expectation, one of those 79 rules that most people didn't even know existed. So what was happening there is we were causing behavior problems to occur when they shouldn't have been occurring. Do you teach your expectations to your kid? One of the things that a lot of teachers will tell me is I give them the handbook. That's not good enough. We're talking explicit instruction. You go through the expectations, I'm going to role play it, we're going to practice it, and then you're going to show me you know what they are independently. That's key. Explicitly teach classroom routines, same thing. Engage in active supervision. Provide precision requests for minor infrequent behavior errors. And this comes from a lot of the work from Ron Nelson, who's at the University of Nebraska. One of the things we want teachers to not do, and it's hard to do at first, is not to provide threats and warnings to students. Threats and warnings for our most difficult to deal with kids. Generally those kids who are fairly oppositional, threats and warnings tend to escalate their problem behaviors. So we're going to provide a precision request. Many of you were trained that that was nothing more than a redirect. Okay? Decreasing threats and warnings are important. Now, I want to point out one thing. I mentioned in terms of the positive to negative interactions. Teachers in general, some older research years ago, talked about what teachers do in the classroom. And generally, it fairly holds true in most of the classrooms I go into, and that is teachers are somewhere around 2 to 5 times more likely to attend to negative behaviors than they are to attend to positive behaviors. Teachers generally get into negative scanning where they're trying to catch kids being bad versus catching kids who are being good. Now, interestingly about the Hart and Risley data, here's what the data say. Remember I said 2 to 5 times for teachers to attend to negative behaviors as opposed to positive behaviors. Hart and Risley data, lower socioeconomic status families, and I'm going around here, lower socioeconomic families on average in terms of the quality of interactions with their kids engage in about 2 to 1 desists to positive statements. About a 2 to 1 ratio of negative to positive statements. Students who come from middle class families generally have about a 2 to 1 ratio of positives to negatives. Students who come from a higher socioeconomic family, you're looking at a ratio of about 5 to 6 to 1 positives to negatives. Higher socioeconomic families in general then tend to be more positively based than negatively based. We want to use preventative strategies such as pre-corrections for chronic errors, ensure the curriculum is matched to the student's skill. And this is where I'm going with the Hart and Risley data. Aim for a ratio of 5 to 1 positives to negatives in the classroom. Now, there is some variation in there depending upon who you read. Randy Sprick, for example, he looks at about a 3 to 1 ratio, finding 3 positive behaviors to every 1 negative behavior. Horner and Sugai, they generally recommend around 4 to 1. Because I'm competitive, I'm always going to beat them by 1. 5 to 1. So really the point is you want about a 3 to 5 to 1 ratio of positives to negatives to make it a positive relationship in the classroom to decrease behavior errors. And quite frankly, in my experience, if you want the biggest bang for the buck, if you want the simplest behavior management technique that we could use to decrease behavior problems in the classroom, that's it. It has a huge impact on students. This is another comic strip here, or a cartoon. I wouldn't say your son is a bad child. He's gifted at disruptive behavior. So we try to find anything that's good with our kids. Now, in terms of academic performance, and again, going back, I said that there are generally two issues, 2 types of students that we deal with in the classroom. Generally, the first one would be a won't do. And won't do kids generally are more motivational issues. These kids, rule of thumb, and it's only rule of thumb if I go in and I'm assessing a student, these students tend to be attention-seeking kids. It's a motivational issue. My intervention is going to be focused to that student in terms of motivation and looking at the attention aspects of misbehavior versus the second type of student. The second type of student that I generally see in the classroom are can't-dos, and these students are typically escape, avoidant, motivated students. Now, if you notice what I would do in an assessment, if it's a won't do, I'm going to do some type of indirect assessment. This is a functional behavioral assessment. I'm going to do some type of descriptive analysis, and generally, I may move into my behavior support plan. There's a big difference, though, with a can't-do. A can't-do student, I'm going to move into academic assessments. My intervention is going to be different for these students. The intervention for can't-do students, that intervention is going to be academically based, not behaviorally based. So if I can use a program that addresses behavior, a program that is at the right instructional level for my student, it makes my job a lot easier trying to go in and diagnose what's going on with the student. Those are can't-dos. So one of the things we're going to try to do when we're integrating behavior management procedures within a curriculum is to try to decrease our can't-dos to the maximum extent possible. So what schools should do? Support students with and without disability in accessing the general ed setting and curriculum in a successful manner, meaning that they have to be successful. When considering comprehensive academic programming, and you've heard a lot about RTI, we're also going to be adding PBS, or school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports, as part of that. If we design a curriculum, we want to design a curriculum that includes behavior management components. This is an example, and Mark showed a graphic similar to this. This just shows the academic and behavior, and it's interesting when you look at the RTI model and the SWPBIS model, they're very similar. They're 3-tier models generally, although some states go to different tiers, 4 or 5 tiers, for example. But generally, same thing. So we're going to look at universal interventions for behavior, targeted interventions, and intensive. If we're working in behavior management approaches into a curriculum, I'm generally working at this level in terms of behavior support. Okay? All right, these are big ideas. Basically, if we look at programs, and I'll show you examples of each one of these, generally we can take and build in behavior management components within a curriculum in these 4 areas. 1, classroom organization. And by the way, every one of these have been shown to decrease behavior management issues. So expectations, routines, transitions. Self-management component. It's also considered, some people call that cognitive behavior therapy. Social development aspects, and finally, effective instruction. Effective instruction includes a scaffolded instruction, differentiated instruction, positive and corrective feedback, structure and organization, opportunities to respond, and we'll talk more about that later. This is a big issue right now, that we know we can decrease a lot of our behavior problems in a classroom if we get kids moving at a good clip. And finally, motivational systems. So this information, a lot of this work came from 3 publications that Nancy and I wrote. The first one was published in Interventions in Schools and Clinic. It hasn't come out yet. So you'll find a lot of this information in these publications that's expanded upon what I'm talking about today. Second one is Impress and Education and Treatment of Children. And then the third one was with Ron Nelson and I, and that was out of the Journal of Direct Instruction a few years ago. Okay, let's start with classroom organization. Classroom organization involves the use and teaching of effective expectations and routines and management of transitions. When we talk about expectations, when teachers use and teach effective expectations, the probability of problem behaviors occurring can be decreased. This would be an example. ACEs, for example, would be expectations that we would use in the classroom. Attend to the teacher, collaborate with your partner, express yourself through thoughtful comments and questions, and show your best work. And again, these are taught explicitly to the students with feedback. Here's an example that was with Read to Achieve, by the way. This is with corrective reading, the STAR expectations. Sit tall or sit in the learning position, track with your finger, answer on signal, and respect others. In the SRA Flex Literacy, in the project experience, we prompt teachers. I don't know if that's working. We prompt teachers. Before beginning the project, review established classroom rules and procedures with students, discuss how these will be implemented during the project experience. We can build the instructions into a curriculum to prompt teachers to go over the expectations before we begin instruction. In terms of routines, again, all of this is research-based. According to Archer and Hughes, in classes where routines and procedures are clearly delineated, taught, and reviewed, and used, appropriate behavior is much more likely to occur, and the class is more likely to run smoothly. Literally, predictability predicts ability. In addition to classroom routines, there's also a need for consistent and predictable instructional routines or formats. And students are better able to predict what is going to occur next when predictable instructional formats are utilized. So an example, this is from Flex. There's always, every time the student logs on and we start a lesson, there's a lesson walkthrough. It is a predictable routine. The students know what's going to happen each time they go through the program. This is an example from Read to Achieve. So we have a 5-day sequence that the students learn. So in day 1, vocabulary, comprehension strategies are taught, fluency, cold timing, lesson wrap-up. Day 2, vocab, comp strategies, fluency, silent read, manual imagery, lesson wrap-up. Day 3, vocab, comp, fluency, partner read, standardized test questions, lesson wrap-up. Day 4, again, vocab, comp strategies, fluency, partner read, information learned, and lesson wrap-up. And finally, day 5, assessment, think, pair, share, fluency, hot timing, self-reflection, and lesson wrap-up. The students learn this routine. This is an example from Read to Achieve again. This is a routine that we use with regard, in this case, the SQ3R strategy. So we're big on building in routines into the program where students can predict what's going to happen from time to time. And in fact, again, that is a scientifically validated behavior management approach, is predictability, building that in for our students. This is a 5-day routine in terms of the Flex Literacy print experience. So before reading, what are we going to do? During reading, what are we going to do? After reading, what are we going to do? And again, the students learn that routine every single time. Same routine. In terms of transitions tend to increase the likelihood that students will misbehave. And according to Slavin, it's a great quote, transitions are the seams of class management at which classroom order is most likely to come apart. This is where we see a lot of our behavior problems occurring when we have downtime and when we have transition management issues. Therefore, teachers should plan transitions to try to decrease the amount of time it takes for them to occur. We should work on this. We should have expectations for the kids on how long it should take to transition from one task to the next, or from one learning experience to the next, and we do that. In Read to Achieve, in Flex Literacy, for example, we have the 3 different experiences, digital, digital print, and digital print project. The students learn that routine of when they're supposed to transition from one thing to the next. And once they get that down, there's a little prompting to get them to make those transitions, and they make the transitions quickly. This is, again, another example of classroom organization and transition. And again, the kids are taught how to transition quickly to decrease any type of off-task behavior. In terms of effective instruction, this is our second category. Effective instruction increases student success and in turn decreases problem behaviors. And it includes the following: scaffolded instruction, structure and organization, differentiated instruction, opportunities to respond, positive and corrective feedback, and finally motivational systems. And I'll show you examples of each one of these. So in terms of scaffolded instruction, and you've heard a lot about that in here, but I'll just go through it quickly because Jan talked about this earlier. But basically, we've got explicit modeling, guided practice, independent practice, or collaborative work, and then also assessment of mastery and review for maintenance. These instructional components are known to affect student achievement in a positive manner and can in turn decrease problem behaviors. So you heard about the I do, we do, you do that Anita Archer talks about. This is the model that we use in Flex Literacy. Again, it is simply the same type of scaffolding we talked about: the model, guide, monitor, mastery, check, and review. This is an example from Read to Achieve. Strong teacher support, that's faded to moderate teacher support, that's faded to student independence, that's faded to where students are working on their own. Notice, and this was mentioned earlier, there's a difference between this student independence and this student independence, review and application. Okay? Students are working collaboratively here. Here they're working independently. And that's from Read to Achieve. This is an example of scaffolding in the Flex Literacy program. So here we have strong model. We have an avatar that walks the student through the skill. Then we have the guidance, where the avatar is walking the student through the skill, but then the kid starts gradually taking over more and more of the demands. Here's monitor, the kid's totally independent, and again, then we go into quiz progress. That's scaffolding. Now, why would we use scaffolding, especially with kids who are struggling in reading? The reason is we don't want them to create a lot of errors. When we talk about kids who have behavior problems, when they start creating errors, what happens is they start getting frustrated and starts breeding behavior problems. In terms of structure and organization, we know if there is a lack of structure or organization in instruction, students are more likely to misbehave. And can occur in the following ways. Lessons are planned each day or across several days. Lessons are scripted with an easy-to-follow daily plan of instruction. Lessons are systematic in nature, so a logical order to the instructional tasks keeps errors to a minimum. And this is an example from Flex Literacy. Teachers have a calendar to organize their instruction, so they know what's going to happen week to week, day to day, month to month, and so on. This is another example that structure and organization is built in. So we have a model, guide, monitor. If the students are struggling, and I'll talk about that in a minute, they go in perhaps to an individualized instructional format, then they go back. If they're achieving well, they go into a mastery check, then they go into critical thinking activities in the print experience. So there's high structure built into the program, and again, the students learn that structure. This is an example of flex literacy in terms of the scripting that we have in the program. And one thing that is interesting about the program is the amount of blue gradually decreases as the program goes along. So not only are we fading out instruction for the student, we're fading out prompting for whom? The teacher. This is differentiated instruction. Differentiated instruction allows teachers to meet the needs of all students, moving from more teacher-directed instruction when students are naive learners to more student-centered instruction when students have the skills to do it on their own. Multisensory instruction, and Nancy mentioned that earlier, relates to instruction that incorporates all three learning sensory modes: auditory, visual, tactile, in each instructional lesson. Matching instruction to student learning needs involves determining the appropriate placement level and instructional intensity required based on student skill levels. Again, I can't stress that enough for kids who have behavior issues. We've got to make sure that we're instructing the kids at the right instructional level. If instruction is not matched to student skill level, the problem behaviors may result. Placement tests then should be used to determine if problem behaviors are escape or avoidance motivated, and I mentioned that earlier. So again, going back, if we have a student who's engaging in severe problem behaviors, typically they fall into one of the two categories: can't do's and won't do's. If we have a can't do, much of that can be solved, not all of it, but much of that can be solved or helped by using a program that incorporates good behavior management procedures within the program itself. This is an example of a placement test. This is from Read to Achieve. Again, making sure the students are at the right instructional level. This is from Flex Literacy. Here we have 9 entry points based on their Lexile performance. It's critical, and we try to really be diligent about this, making sure that the students entered into the programs at the right point. This is a variety of sensory modes for instruction. So the students are on the computer, they're seeing things, they're doing things, pointing and clicking. Here's the print experience, lots of discussion with the teacher, and then the project experience. All three modalities are contained in there. FlexWorks data management system is built in, so a good curriculum will have a data management system built in for you to make decisions on what you need to do from time to time. So for example, in Flex, if the student is at below 80% for 2 consecutive experiences, we do an online remediation by the computer. If the student still is below 80% the next 2, then the teacher does the individualized instruction. This is an example of skill differentiation in the print experience. Again, always matching the instruction to where the student is. So individualized instruction, refer to FlexWorks to provide additional instruction based on students' progress in the digital experience. Independent reading level, where can the student read? What type of reading materials can this kid access? And then critical thinking activities or applications. If a student is at 100% for 3 consecutive days, then the kid skips lessons. So again, it's all differentiated instruction where the student isn't getting too much repetition. This is an example of Read to Achieve. So response to intervention, again, built in. What do we do if the student is approaching mastery, at mastery, or is ELL? In terms of OTRs, this is where a lot of the research is going in terms of OTRs, looking at how quickly the students are responding. Again, we know that student misbehavior will decrease if we increase the response rates. So results from intervention research shows that increasing OTRs correctly to academic questions, tasks, and demands also positively affects students' appropriate academic and social behaviors. So success promotes success. When students respond correctly and frequently, they learn more and misbehave less. So student engagement, ways we can increase student engagement, unison group responses. That increases our opportunities to respond versus calling on students individually. Once students are responding at a higher rate, then we can do time for turns. But the point of unison group responding is to increase our opportunities to respond. This is an example of flex literacy. We've looked at what our opportunities to respond are during the program, and we range between 0.72 per minute and 3.96 per minute. The difference there is the length of the passage the student has to read. But we're, again, concerned about making sure the students are in there constantly responding, not having a lot of downtime. That's when misbehaviors start occurring. In terms of positive and corrective feedback, this is really important, especially in curriculum design. Effective positive and corrective feedback is a critical aspect of effective instruction. Without such feedback, students who commit errors will continue to practice those errors. Effective error correction, and this is critical, and pre-service teachers are not good at this. Effective error correction procedure avoids negative phrases such as, no, that's incorrect, you're guessing, you can do that better, you're not trying hard enough. Guess what? I see this quite a bit. Do you all see this? I see this in classrooms. And now if I'm working with a student who has a behavior issue, guess what's going to happen when I provide feedback in that manner to a student? I get an escalation of problem behaviors. So provide praise. Praise is a critical motivational technique. Praise students based on group expectations. Nice job collaborating with your partner. Use teacher-kid points. Have eagle eyes. Again, a 3 to 5 to 1 rule. Use specific general praise 50% of the time. If you've never practiced this, this is really hard to do in a classroom. Most pre-service teachers aren't even near this. The rule is, if I'm going out and supervising a student teacher, is I want 50% of your praise statements to be specific, telling the student exactly what he or she is doing correctly. At least 50%. Most students aren't even at 10%. This small technique has a huge impact on student motivation. Prompt for behavior. If it is not shown, then praise it. Show me how you attend to the teacher, then say that's a way to attend to the teacher, versus providing a threat or warning. Again, these are some minor tweaks we can use in our instruction that decreases behavior problems. Use a praise around technique. Juan and Brian and Sarah attending to the teacher, be sure to praise Nancy when she starts attending to the teacher. Not incorrect. That's a negative error correction procedure. So to correct errors, remember to use, in terms of response errors, for example, my turn, your turn, starting over, and with signal errors, I need to hear everyone or all voices, repeat the task, starting over. This is an example in reading mastery. This is a specific praise statement. Good, you said all the sounds. Again, a lot of these good behavior management techniques, and they are behavior management techniques, are built into good curriculum materials. This is what we did for flex literacy. We had writing frameworks in terms of how to provide feedback. What does a specific praise statement look like? So all the writers had to use these frameworks in providing feedback to student performance. In terms of motivational systems, Nancy mentioned how important motivation is, especially for secondary level kids. Students are more likely to be engaged in on-task when the lesson is presented at a lively pace in which the lesson moves smoothly and quickly from input to response to feedback and back again. Praise has been cited as an effective strategy for promoting school achievement and positive classroom behavior. The importance of praise cannot be overstated. And point systems have been noted as effective motivators for students. So here's some examples. This is one motivational device we use.
And all sorts of clues to solving them. But when those clues are hidden in a piece of text, that's when they call me in. Detective Deeds, Text Analysis Unit.
It's back here, Detective, by the freezer. Someone smashed this freezer door and took a bunch of the fish inside.
Did they take anything else?
We're checking, but it looks like this freezer was the only one they hit.
All right. Where is it?
Where is what?
The text. That's why I'm here, isn't it?
Oh yeah, the paper. It's over here. It's pretty crumpled up, so I didn't think it was anything. But Penny over there thought we should call you. Can you make anything out? It looks like it's about penguins.
We'll check the details to see if that's the main topic. Smaller penguin species of the Antarctic primarily feed on krill and squid. Species found farther north tend to eat fish. Adelie feed primarily on small krill, while chinstraps forage for large krill. Emperor and king mainly eat fish and squid. None are capable of flight. Here are some species names: Adelie, chinstraps, emperor, and king. And we know none of these species are able to fly. These details pretty much confirm the main topic.
What is it? What's the main topic?
Penguins.
I just said penguins.
So with every skill, it's introduced with an animated video to introduce the skills to the kids. That's a motivational aspect. Also, rich reading text, things that the kids like to read. Frozen in time, this is from Read to Achieve. Again, from Read to Achieve, different books like Hatchet, Phineas Gage, A Princess in the Press, No End in Sight, Trial by Ice. Highly motivating text for students to read. This is a praise statement from Flex Literacy. Well done, boat is a singular noun. It's the correct answer. That's a specific praise statement. Students in Flex get to earn points to decorate a room. So it's kind of like the Sims game. So this would be an example of some rooms that students decorate as part of the program. This is an item shop. They can earn points to buy items from the item shop. And every student gets to decorate or design his or her own avatar. And they can be little monsters, they can be people, and they can design them however they want. Again, it's important for motivation for our students. We build in games. These are academic games. Here is the correct, try to correctly spell the plural form of penny. This is another game. I've seen this game. This is a pretty cool game. If the kids answer the question right, their car speeds up. They also have oil slicks they have to avoid. But again, they get a break to take these games, and these are academically focused games within the digital experience. This is a student point system from corrective reading, another motivational technique. Teacher point games are used. In terms of self-management, critical skill for students to learn. Maybe the most important skill for students to learn is how to manage their own behaviors. This is an example of spelling through morphographs. This is a contract for the student. What does the student promise to do, and what will the teacher deliver? That's a contract built into the program. This is an example in Flex Literacy. This is a self-evaluation form in the project experience. I spoke clearly. This is during Reader's Theater. I spoke clearly when it was my turn to read my lines. I worked well with my class to practice my lines and so on. Again, this is a self-management program that we would build into the program. Not much different than what I would do if I designed an individualized behavior management program for a student. Here we have reading logs that the students can fill out to track their own progress. This is from Read to Achieve, narrative text. So excerpt 1, this is prediction. I think today's excerpt is about, and then again, a self-evaluation, was I correct or incorrect? Here's another one from Read to Achieve. Survey, did I survey, yes or no? Self-evaluation. This is from Flex Literacy. This is with the project experience, and it's really small to read, but collaborative assessment guide, presentation assessment guides, informative writing assessment guides, writing checklists that the kids fill out. Again, lots of self-evaluation built in. This is from corrective reading. Kids can graph their own fluency. In Read to Achieve, you saw this one earlier. In terms of a fluency chart, we also build in self-evaluation. So here, did I improve? Yes or no. Did I reach my goal? Yes or no. In terms of social development, another key component, fourth component in behavior management. Students must develop social behaviors to have meaningful relationships with their peers, teachers, and parents. Social competence is considered a critical skill in today's world. So these involve individual responsibilities, social etiquette, project contribution, team responsibility, collaborating with team members. And in Read to Achieve, we have reciprocal teaching, for example. Again, a lot of collaborative types of interactions with students to develop those social interaction skills. So every student has a role: a summarizer, clarifier, question generator, predictor, character analyzer, discussion leader, passage selector. This is an example of the reciprocal teaching chart that the students would fill out. This is a think, pair, share chart that the students fill out. And again, in Flex Literacy, we have project information sheet, project action plans. How well are you collaborating with your team to complete the project? So overall, in good curriculum design, we really have 4 aspects of good behavior management techniques that are built in: classroom organization, expectations, routines, transitions, self-management components, social development, and effective instruction that involve scaffolded instruction, differentiated instruction, positive or corrective feedback, structure and organization, opportunities to respond to motivational systems. That's it. Questions or comments? Thank you.